Hello everyone and welcome to another video with me, FlyJSim Pilot, and today we're taking a look at the latest exciting release for X-Plane 11, that is the FlyJSim Q4XP. It is a Dash 8 Q400 aircraft for X-Plane 11, of course. I was particularly interested in this release, which has only just come out, and the reason is I used to fly the Dash 8 Q400, so it's been really fun for me to start reliving those memories. I haven't flown it for a few years, so I apologise if there's anything I get wrong in the video. I'm sure there'll be plenty of things that changed since I left the aircraft, but it is a really unique aeroplane. It was a great aeroplane to fly and certainly to practice landing in strong winds, but we'll talk about all these things. So I'm going to go through it today as a sort of first impressions, and then we'll be using it on the channel plenty, I'm sure, and in future streams. But I remember lots of the big issues or gotchas of this aircraft. I'm sure there's plenty I'll forget as well, but it should be good fun to go and relive those memories. I've been already transported back to the past with this add-on. It's very high quality, and there's lots of really nice things that just capture that Dash 8 feeling. So let's get started. As ever, I am a real-world Airbus pilot. I was a real-world Q400 pilot, not anymore, but I must stress that none of this is for any real-world use. It's just to give you some extra context on your home simulations. I thought we'd start with a bit of a walk around. So I've already done one sector in this aircraft just to try and remind me some of the details. So you come down these inbuilt steps. This is obviously all connected, and you do start to get a real sense of the detail they've gone for on this add-on. Very, very crisp modelling all around. It's really very impressive. So they've really done the work. This sort of rubberized texture on this indoor area, and you can just click on things to open and close them and see all of the animations are done properly, and then that handle pops up and you can pop it out, and you've got all the detailing here in the livery, which is it's just so impressive, and it really adds up when you look around the whole model and you can see all these little rivets just shining in the sun at low light. So very pleased with that. Angle of attack indicator, oh sorry, not indicator, angle of attack sensor, I suppose, there. And as you move forward on the walk around of this aircraft, you get the sense that it's actually how low the nose of this aeroplane is. It's a uniquely low situated nose, really, to fly. There's not many commercial aircraft that operate at this speed with the cockpit right down there. I suppose the CRJ being another one, another Bombardier aircraft. You've got your pitot, and then this is a ice indicator, something the Airbus actually misses often. You don't need it on the Airbus. So what this does is it sort of vibrates, and then if ice builds on it, the frequency of the vibration changes, and then it will tell you in the flight deck you have ice building up on the aircraft. We've got the towing angle stickers just to give you a sense of the detail, and this is where the ground power unit would be plugged in, hence the DC 28 volts. This is a primarily DC aircraft, so the electrical systems are mostly DC, whereas there's a lot more AC on a larger, more complex jet. This little pin here, this is a hydraulic lockout pin that's used, and you have to pull this and rotate it to lock out the nose gear if you want to pull the aircraft forward. The reason is the nose gear retracts forward into the bay, and if it were to be done without hydraulic system, pressurized, this would potentially cause it to collapse. So that's what that little lockout's for. Behind here you have the batteries and avionics bay and circuit breakers. You can, on the real aircraft, I think that's doing a window blind behind there. The real aircraft, obviously these pop open, and you do sometimes see pilots checking those on their walk around, depending. Very no nose gear, hard to get your your head into. But this is the taxi light, and the reason I'm pointing it out is it's actually attached to the part of the nose gear that turns. So when you are taxiing around, you get the taxi light points in the direction of the nose gear. So I'll definitely be testing it out to see how that works, or see if it works. But that's quite a nice feature. Hence, you don't have to have turn-off lights like the Airbus has on this aircraft, which is quite a nice piece of design. We've got more pitots, angle of attack, obviously the backup, and another sensor for the angle of attack. And the ice. You'll notice as well, you can actually see the pilots. So the ground crew on this aircraft will be standing around here, and you can look straight into the eye of the pilots. So it had a very clear communication with the ground crew, especially when they're pushing you back, which is unusual. On the Airbus, they're right underneath you, so you have to use the headset. But here you can see them. You still use a headset, still plugs in on the other side over there, but still, it's just a relatively unusual aircraft to have that where you're looking at each other. You've got the cargo door, and you'll see that here you can click it open. This is not a entrance door of any kind. It is just used for this hold. I don't remember the name now. I want to say hold 5, but I'm not sure if that's true. But this was not supposed to be accessible during flight. It's a bit like an actual cargo hold. So, but it is more storage if you need it. Where do we click? I think we click there. This obviously emergency exit as required. Not sure if that's functioning or not, but I don't want to break that. We wouldn't normally be testing that. More antennas, the hot sink outflow, as you can see there, as per usual. And these big shields, really nicely done. This is the ice shield. So all it does is nothing fancy. It's just there to block ice coming off the propellers. So if ice builds up on these, then it will bounce off that instead of denting the fuselage and needing more engineering effort. So moving on to the engines, I don't want to spend too long on this video, but I know that when I do a stream, and I will be streaming this aircraft, I won't have time to talk about a lot of the things I'm interested in. So what was I looking for with the propellers? Well, I wanted the texturing to be right. They were this really noticeable matte sort of black, and they've absolutely nailed it here. It just is the perfect sort of texture. So these are really nicely done, and the dimensions are just spot on. I mean, it's just like you're reliving it. So they're heated. The propeller have a heated leading edge, which is this sort of boot here. It's not actually boot, it's an electrical leading edge which is heated. You can't see it here, but behind this hub, there's all sorts of clever gizmos that are used to maneuver these propeller blades. This is their feather position, i.e. they are pointed straight into the airflow, meaning that they don't produce drag, and this is what you'd have it looking like if the engine failed. This is the inlet for the engine, which is a turboprop engine, of course. So it is a jet engine sitting back there, which instead of spinning a fan at the front, spins a big propeller. These are effectively free as a result. They're just sitting there on a turbine. They're turned around by airflow once the jet engine starts. So you can spin these around yourself, although you're only supposed to spin them in one direction, I was told, because of the way the brushes are set up for generating electricity and so, or for transferring electricity to the heated parts. But there you go. You've got a boot here on the inlet for the engine. So this is not electric, this is pneumatic. And you've got the same along the leading edges of the wings, lots of different sections, and on the inside there. Dash 8 has two bulbs, which is great, and it automatically swaps to the second system if the first system breaks. Airbus doesn't do that. The Airbus has two filaments, but it will actually only swap when you do it, whereas the Dash 8 would do it automatically. And obviously nice big ailerons, mechanical ailerons, not hydraulically assisted, and the Dash you're expected to do it yourself. It isn't considered fast enough or needing that. It does have, of course, hydraulic elevator and rudder, though, for reasons we'll discuss at some point, I'm sure. So obviously, I'm really impressed with this aircraft's exterior. They've done such a good job, and the texturing in particular is just lovely. Look at all these streaks and oil marks. There is a gauge up here, and I used to have to check it. I forget what it used to tell us. Accumulator pressure, something like that. I think it was a hydraulic gauge, but it's not modelled here. But yeah, we'll let them off on that one. It's seeing as I can't remember what it is. Moving on to the rear of the fuselage, then we have these big vanes that sort of stick out into the airflow, presumably put there to help with the handling of the aircraft. Not sure which handling they were concerned about when they added those, but they've been added by some test pilots, I assume, at some point. We've got the rear door. This door not really used because on the other side we have the normal steps. As we come around to the tail, you'll see that they stopped bothering with the flash rivets, and we have the sort of sticking out rivets of this last section. The Hawk, actually, funnily enough, an airplane we've been seeing recently, has the same thing. And if we look underneath the tail, quite unusual, but due to the design, we should have somewhere, there is a tail strike sensor. I think it would have been here, so I can't see that, but I'm not 100% certain on that one. I'm pretty sure it was visible. Certainly there is an ECAM. I say ECAM. There is a warning in the flight deck for a tail strike in the Dash 8. So yeah, APU sits in the back, quite conventional. Not the most reliable APU ever, but yeah, there it is. The airplane doesn't need bleed air to start. It starts on electricity. It can be started on batteries, which is really, really handy, especially if you're running on an airplane with a broken APU. But yeah, obviously all the service doors, lots of oil and so on, which is quite typical around there's a little jet engine sitting back there, and up to that huge tail. Really, really nice. Again, fantastic modelling. They've just not missed anything. We've got these little logo lights that shine down on the logos on the tail. They've got all the static discharge wicks. So amazing. Really, really nice job. I wish I could tell you what all of these little details were, but sadly I just can't. As we come on the other side, we've got the cargo hold. Famously difficult handle on this door. There is a real knack to it. Some people could do it and other people couldn't. It's very neat, but yeah, not quite the same as a lot of other aircraft, and manual to open initially, and then you have to hold it up. I like all the scratching and things in the back there, quite accurate. And then we have the rear door. So much the same on this side of the aircraft, obviously. So let's head up into the cabin. So obviously this is a small aircraft, 78 seats, so it only needs 2 crew members, one at the back, one at the front. No toilets at the back or anything like that, or you can ignore that, that's going to come up later. So just a sort of rear galley for looking after things. As you move through the cabin, nice details like these working overhead locker bins, which is pretty great. All the window blinds work. And as you come here, you can see that you get that fantastic view of the wheels and so on. So it's a nice airplane for people who enjoy aviation to travel on, because you get to see the gear, you get to see the touchdown and the propellers and everything. So it's quite good. Some passengers, of course, don't like that. If they aren't interested, they might not want to see all the extra parts of the airplane. And you would occasionally get a passenger who would see something that they didn't like, and they'd call up, because obviously they can see more things than they used to, so tyres and so on, so they're not really sure what they should look like, so they might be a bit more nervous. So that's something to consider in this airplane. Here's that emergency exit. Front position for the front cabin crew member. Here's that cargo hold we talked about just on the right. Here's the toilet, so much talked about. Excellent detailing, of course, all the right sounds, even the sound of the toilet seat lid, which is great, and it does flush. Fantastic detailing. I'm not going to complain about it, but I can't resist saying that the Dash 8s I flew certainly didn't have that style of flush. That's a vacuum flush, like on a jet aircraft or a fancy aircraft, I suppose, where it uses a vacuum to suck everything away. Whereas in the Dash that I flew, it was more like a chemical toilet, so it just pours blue liquid in. There you go. Oh, gone a bit too far there. Let's go back. Right, let's close this door. It is a small space up at the front. You have to step up into the flight deck and fit in. And as we go into here, you'll notice this seat. This is the jump seat. It just plunks down like that. Then you sit on that, cushioned, and then you lean up against this against this back panel, which is completely vertical. Not the most comfy thing. You get into the seats of this aircraft, you have to sort of use these handles and swing yourself over. They don't move far enough. They certainly don't slide sideways like they do on the Airbus or a lot of jet aircraft. So you have to sort of swing your legs over the middle and get in. So you get used to doing that. Quite comfy once you're in. No real problems there. Armrests that don't do too much fancy, but they are cushioned, which is a nice treat. The Airbuses are not. They are completely just hard plastic. So to have cushioned armrests was very nice, something I do miss. So here we are sat in the seat, and you'll notice we have a iPad-style tablet computer, which is great, and this is where we can do all of our loading. I'm not going to go through this in too much detail. We'll look at it more on streams, and there's also a really nice set of checklists that you can tick through. So yeah, perfect for our use, and they've even got, it looks like, room to change that to abnormal. I don't know if that's going to arrive, but there is an arrow option. You can change all your settings, so I've got rid of the yaw acting on the tiller. I've got rid of the yoke. You can show them, obviously, but they are quite big. They're wide apart to make sure you can see the PFD, but the result is you can't really get to the barrow and so on very easily, so I definitely hide those when I'm in a simulator, which is quite common. I do that in most airplanes. I've gone with pascals, kilograms, obviously, and then you can set your row. Not entirely sure what the roll difference makes, so we'll just leave that as captain, and you can set how it turns on when the engines are off, so cold and dark, that's what we'll go with. So in a second, we'll power it up. So I'm going to connect a GPU. You can hear it powering up outside. I don't remember the power up checklist for this aircraft. I'm sure there's loads of things I'm about to do wrong, but you do have a little GPU switch up here, so we click that and it should be available, and then I'm going to put the main batteries on to power on the airplane and the battery master, and it comes to life. So just give it a second to think about it, and we can select our load. So I'm going to let's put on a few passengers. We're just going to fly from here over to Glasgow just for a very short flight. And how much fuel do we want? We'll take 2 tons of fuel. I don't remember any of the fuel figures. So there we go, and I'm going to click confirm, and now it will just start loading if I click start loading, and you'll see the passengers boarding and so on, and it gives you a time of how long it's been running. Great, let's get it powered up, get some of the screens on. Okay, the airplane's sort of powered up now. It's not quite ready to go, but some fun things I can show you on the flight deck. This is the rudder pedal adjuster, and if you look at this, even scrolling that actually adjusts the position of those pedals, which is something I've not seen before, very rarely modelled, so that's quite a nice feature. As you move across, you have the 2 FMSs. This aircraft could be equipped with just 1, so it's quite a luxury to have 2, but that does add a little bit of complexity because it's not really designed for it. It's an unusual FMS, the universal FMS. It's different to what you're used to probably if you're flying modern day jets such as the Airbus in Flight Simulator or X-Plane, but there you go, it's something we're going to get used to. The magic is you don't have to be too complex with it. It doesn't speak to the aircraft as much as, for example, on the Airbus. It is slightly less less complicated than that. But it does have a lot of features, and they've modeled, as far as I can tell, all of them. I mean, I'm sure there's some that aren't in there for various reasons, but it's amazing how far they've gone with that. This is our main engine display, and this is the sort of systems display over here. Again, modeled very well. This is the typical sort of format on the ground, although you'd actually quite commonly put, if we put system on the left, and then you'd have that set to doors. So let's see if I can remember how to do this. So I need to press doors, and then if I put the FO side to PFD system, there we go. So the way to do that is the only way to display two system pages at once, because there's only one control for which system. So I press engine or fuel, you just get both. But if you put it to what you want on the captain side, and then you switch it around, it will always default initially to the electrical page. So there you go. So now we can see the electrics and the doors. This is some of the trivia that's just coming back into my head. It's so much fun to bring it all back to life. They've done an amazing job. Caution warning panel up here, lots to talk about, won't go into it today. I've turned on the position lights outside, and what we're going to do is just load in a brief route into our FMC. You can click on the FMC to pop it out, but I'm going to use the 3D cockpit one. So there's the initial position. I do need to update my database, but there we go. Let's go to flight plan, starting in Edinburgh, which is great, and then I want to put in something here. So you select where you want to put it in and put in the destination. We're going to fly over to Glasgow and then press enter. That is the correct airport. Accept. Now, something to remember about this FMS is there's no scratch pad. You'll see that if I just start, let's remove that. If I just start typing, nothing happens. You have to have selected what you want to do. Really different sort of setup, and it takes a while to get used to. I want to put in a departure. I need to go to menu, depart. We're going to depart from runway 24. So I can't press it like you would in Airbus. You see it says 224. We put in the little 2 and enter. Again, it's going to be loads more to say. Let's just do a Tala departure and enter that. Don't need a transition, enter. And now in the flight plan, you'll see it's all here, and I can scroll down. I'm going to press menu again to put in my arrival. I'm not going to put in any star, but I put number 2 for runway 23. And then I'm going to put in no arrival, but we will do the ILS 23. So that's number 2, enter. I don't need the transition, enter. So there we go. We now have a bit of a flight plan. It does have these no links. If I can remember how to clear those, there we go. We can delete it. Look at that, success. Flight plan unlinked, because it's complaining that there is this discontinuity. Delete that one. There we go. So it now connects up from Tala to the approach. Not very realistic, but there we go. Again, there's so much I don't remember, and we're going to have to work through. But that is a bit of a flight plan. Next, I'm going to we will cross-fill. Oh, excuse me. We'll cross-fill that in a second. So I'm going to finish setting up, and then we'll get the engines going. We're going to start up the APU for electrical power for the engine start. You press power, and it even runs through this byte test. So if I press it on, you'll see that it dances through all the different systems, which is great. And you just press start, and that's going to get up and running. That's sitting out at the back, running through the startup checklist. And this is something I want to talk about. It's the power levers and condition levers. So this is a turboprop aeroplane. We need to get our heads around the fact we have engines to control and propellers. You can hear them closing up the doors. A great detail of FlyJSim, the way that system works, just in the background while you're doing things, just like it does in the real aircraft. You don't have to close the doors yourself. It just sort of happens. So what we are interested in here is how have I set up my controls. I have the Thrustmaster TCA for the Airbus, and what I do is I've removed the detents from one throttle, but I've kept them in the other, and that way I get full control, but I can feel the detents while still also being able to control them. So at the moment, my thrust levers are in the max reverse position, my physical ones. In the Q4XP, you need to have a button assigned to move them forward. So if I move my thrust levers all the way forward, then you see that nothing happens. It just goes to flight idle. At max reverse, they're at disk. Now, you don't need to have max reverse set. There's very few places. The Dash 8 stops very quickly. It's very small and light, and disk is incredibly effective. Reverse was very rarely used. Reverse is more of a incredibly short runway, contaminated runway with snow, things like that. So I'm not going to bother assigning it. What I've got is full back, including max reverse on my thrust levers, equating to disk. I've done this in the X-Plane settings, and I can share this if anyone needs it. I've done a graph to demonstrate this. I've done a response curve to fit it all in. But there we go. So at the moment, they're at disk to flight idle. You then need to assign a button which you can press, and you'll see that it pops up, and then flight low appears, and it will then be maneuverable from there, not with the control lock in place, which is what this is. But now you can see full throttle, and then I've got it set to the flex detent is actually the rating detent, which is used for takeoff, and then the rest of it I just control manually. And then I can pop it back by pressing my auto thrust disconnect buttons, is what I've pressed. They should really be go around, but I'm using them as the auto thrust disconnect buttons, and they can be used to bring it from flight idle forwards. So if I press those, I've got it assigned to each one. So if I want to put one backwards, I just press it again to go backwards. A bit confusing. I'll talk about it maybe in more detail in another video. Let's put the controller back on. Now for the condition levers, I've got nothing assigned to them there, but I have it set to my spoiler lever on my thrustmaster quadrant. It's the spoiler lever, the add-on lever, and that's what I'm using to maneuver that. But for the fuel off to the fuel on position, I don't have it assigned. So they stay in fuel off for now, and we've got the power levers set to disk, and that's where we want them. Disk stands for, it's just disk, they're spinning, but the idea is that you're not going to command any thrust out of the engines. You're just going to have them spinning around, sitting there at disk. It is a bit strange to get your head around because these levers here don't actually command the angle of the blades in the traditional sense all the time. They're slightly different. It's a bit of a strange one, and I'll talk about why at some point, I'm sure. So there we go. That's how I've got it set up. So to recap, I've got that's flight idle on my thrust levers to max reverse, sits in this range, and then above that I've got to press the red buttons on my throttles to move it above it, and same for putting it back down below. I bring it all the way back and then I press the buttons. Going to put the spoiler switch to taxi, otherwise they'll come up when we start the engines, so that's fine there. And the great thing about performance on this aircraft is you can just click on the lower level of the PFD. Now this is a really tedious process in the real aircraft. You've got to press select, wind it, press it again, wind it, and you scroll through them that way. But I think they've come up with a great system here, which is just you click and it puts all the right speeds in, and it's going to be a flap 5 takeoff, no surprise there. So yeah, I really like that. They've done a really good job. Okay, let's finish up our checklists and push back. So takeoff data is now reviewed. I finished loading up the FMS, which is a whole other thing. Let us turn on the batteries and the battery master. They are all on. Door fueling lights are out. The fueling light is actually on this panel over here. You'd have a little fueling caution. Strangely, it's not on the panel. AP bleed off. We don't actually use a bleed air for starting the engines. Anti-collision goes to red, and then we need to be cleared for start. So anti-collision pop up to red, and that is us cleared for start. Next is going to be the after start. So let's start this engines up. I noticed that I think this is weather and terrain are inoperative at the moment on the little display. They would be shown on here otherwise. I think that's what would be there. Again, I'm struggling to remember. So the engine display, before we get going, torque is the main power adjustment. So we go on torque because the RPM of the propellers is constant, i.e. in flight, they'll sit at the RPM we tell them, and we adjust the torque to the engine to adjust how much thrust.
Okay, all doors and hatches are closed, ready to connect.
So they're connecting downstairs. So torque's the main adjustment, and then you've got NH, which is a spinning of the internal part of the jet engine, and then you've got I think that's intermediate turbine temperature. So that's the instead of EGT.
Strap and adapter in position. Release parking brake when ready to start pushback.
Okay, so brakes released. It's this big yellow emergency brake thing, and you notice the pedals go. So you have to actually do it in the right order in the Dash 8. You'd have to press the pedals and then move that lever, and then you have to press them again and then move it back. If you just released it, there'd be a small transfer of hydraulic fluid. Very strange. Lots of different quirks like that in this aircraft, no doubt. But yeah, otherwise we're looking good. So to start the engines, okay, let's start up the engines. So all you do is you move this little selector. It sits in the middle position. Sorry, I should have had that shown. So you move it to the side you want to start, and then you press the select switch. That's going to immediately start turning the engine. It's electrical, and you'll see here NH. When you have an NH, I think it's about 15, but I can't remember. I'm going to click this to put it from fuel off to start feather, and the engine will start spooling up. Brake sets, and let's go have a look at that.
Connecting toes, stand by.
And round it goes. Very quick to start these engines. But you'll notice what it does is it starts up and sits in this start feather position. Love the sound effects. Really takes me back. Oh, we brought the GPU with us. Let's get rid of that. There we go. Yeah, so really quick, really easy. I absolutely love the sound effects here, and we're going to hear a lot more of those. But let's move over and start number 2. Same thing, press start, round it goes. Very quick. Get the fuel on. Just got to hold it in the up position. Oh, and then it goes up, and then fuel flow. Right, there goes. They've already gone. So what we do at this point is we bring these propellers from where they are up to our fully forward. And now you get this fantastic transition. And I'm just going to let you listen to the audio. Again, brilliant audio. It's perfect. It's exactly like the aircraft. I'm so impressed with it all round. So that is going to sit at about 660 RPM, which is, from what I remember, is about right. You can see that the condition levers are actually set to 1020, but they won't manage that on the ground, so that they're just doing their best. They're effectively sat spinning around completely completely against the air. I don't know how to describe it. They're in disc, so they're flat basically. They're not producing any forward thrust. And if we go side on, you'll see that they're very narrow. If I move my throttles forwards, you see them get coarser. Really, really amazing detailing that. I love it, and that's accurate to how it should be. Running through the after start checklist, a couple of little details. The hydraulic number 3 isolation valve is an interesting and quite unique part of this aircraft. So we have a hydraulic systems. You've got the parking brake, standby, and then you've also got your 3 hydraulic systems and their quantities. If you push the isolation valve, you can power up the system 3, and then you would run the elevators, which we can see over here. That's always displayed just on the captain's side at the bottom of the screen there, and the hydraulics is always on the FO side over here. But that's worked, and then you can close it again. We don't need it for takeoff, but yeah, it's just a great simulation to show that that's all there and running. Another interesting part of this aircraft is the steering switch. It's a tiny little metal switch here, and it's hidden away. Very important it's off, because the ground crew can't disconnect the nose wheel steering. So if you push back with this on and you start engines, you'll power up the nose wheel steering, and it could damage the tug or the aircraft. So it's off for pushback, very importantly, and then you flick it forwards when you want to taxi. So if you're ever on a Dash 8 and you feel it taxi and then stop and then power up and then wait a second and then do it, that's what's happened, because it does take a second to actually come to life, the nose wheel steering. It doesn't work straight away. But yeah, so quite a long after start checklist actually. So we'll say that we've got all of that. Your damper can come on as well. And time to taxi out. Good news is that my parking brake assignment just works, so my Thrustmaster TCA has no trouble with that. I've got the tiller assigned to the yaw on my stick, quite common for how I use these aircraft. And away we go. Again, sound effects are just spot on. Really, really something else. The flap lever, I've also managed to set a curve which works, so I can set the flap lever into the 4 notches of the Airbus, because luckily it's 1, 2, 3 and full works exactly the same. Of course it's 15, 30, 5, 10 and 5. So we're going to use 5 for takeoff, so that's set. If you look up on the overhead panel, there's loads of systems. The anti-ice system, you'd run through a test by holding that there, and that would often cause you headaches first thing in the morning, I can tell you that. Which is how you can test the propellers, and then you could also run through a sequence on the boots to make sure that they can hold pressure. You've also got a little pressure gauge over here to check that. So many little quirks to this airplane. It's great fun. I'm having an absolute blast being back in it. You'll hear as well the noise at disc is quite pronounced, and it is noticeable. So what you'll find pilots do is, if you just move slightly forward from disc, it goes quiet. I'm not sure why. It's just a noticeable thing on this aircraft, and it's even quieter at flight idle, but that's obviously burning a bit of extra fuel you shouldn't really be doing just for the noise. But yeah, sitting slightly out of disc is much more comfortable on the ears, but that's certainly not procedure. That's just something that you can find while taxiing. Right, we're going to head out to the runway now. There's obviously flight control checks you need to do. Very important that you get rid of this control lock. And there's all sorts of other things which we'll talk about on streams at some point. Only one tiller on the captain's side. That's the only one we get in this airplane. Nothing on the FO side. We're going to taxi out to runway 24 here at Edinburgh for our departure. Takeoff is quite straightforward, really. We're going to set the power to the detent of NTOP normal takeoff power. There is a reduced button where you can actually bring the reduced takeoff power down here, but I'm not going to use that today. We're going to keep it simple, and I'm going to go for normal takeoff power, which is going to be 90% on the torque. We're whizzing around here. sure ground speed's down at the bottom. There we go, 13 knots. So it's funny, we're only doing 13, but it feels a lot quicker. This airplane is obviously sitting so low to the ground at the front there, you can't help it. And there's that nose wheel light, which you can just see swinging around and pointing in the right direction. I do like that. Quite a neat design. Something worth noting as well on the Dash 8 is the fact that if you bring the propellers to disk, and remember we don't use reverse really, just disk to flight idle, it will gradually bring itself to a halt. Disk doesn't really act like a brake, but there's certainly no thrust pushing you forward, so the airplane will eventually just slow down to nothing and then stop. Quite a difference to a jet. The reason is, of course, in the Dash we can put the propellers to not produce any thrust, whereas on a jet, the fans at the front of the engine, which are there instead of the propellers, they are always set to their sort of thrust producing angle, the cruise sort of angle. They don't change as you adjust power. This is really taking me back. I'm having a lot of fun, I can promise you that. I can't wait to stream this aircraft as well. So let's head out. We're going to climb to 4,000 feet. I'm just making up the procedures here a little bit, so please don't get too upset about exact following the SIDS and stars in this video. It's just to mainly get a chance to look at the aircraft. So let's run through the lining up checklists that they've got here. Camera crew notification, bleed air 1 and 2 min and off. So we're going to have bleeds off for the takeoff in the Dash 8. Anti-collision light can go to white. Transponder TCAS on. So let's not run off the end. So this switches down to white, so you either have red or white beacons, you don't have both, and we are going to put the TCAS on, so we just hold this button here and it goes from standby to on out, which is what we want. Now we're going to line up, it's clear on the approach, so let's get the landing lights on as well. They flick forward in this aircraft, unlike the Airbus, which is the complete opposite. Flight controls we've checked, and the landing light tax lights are on, and that's it. That is the lineup checklist complete. Again, they've really sorted the sounds. So our rotate speed is 118. We've got flap 5 for our takeoff. I'm going to set the FO screen to nav to match ours, and they're going to have a nav source of FMS as well. Not FMS1 though, they want FMS2. There it is, right. So we're going to take off and climb up at 1,000 feet. I'm going to lower the nose, bring the flaps in, bring the propeller levers back. So they're currently set to NTOP, you can see, rated. This is a tiny bit like an Airbus. It does have a FADEC, you see. So it is quite an advanced engine management system. We're going to then bring them back to 900 and it will go to climb thrust. You'll see what I mean. So let's go. Firstly, I'm going to bring these to flight idle, and then to go any further, I have to hold these little buttons, and now I can set them to not emergency. There we go, to the detent, which is NTOP. 90%. We don't need emergency power. Very powerful engines on this aircraft. This is more than enough thrust. You'll notice I should have set this switch to flight. It pops there automatically like the real aircraft does, even if you forget it, which is great. And away we go. Really low down, so it just feels a lot faster than it actually is. There's rotate. Now in the real aircraft you need a bit of right rudder as you get up into the air because of the torque of those propellers. So there's positive climb, gear up, also works on the TCA. I'm going to pitch to about 15 degrees. Something sensible, I really can't remember exactly what it was. Trim out the aircraft, and away we go. Climbing up above V2 certainly, which was 123, and you'll see it yawing ever so slightly off to the left, so yeah, a bit of right rudder required. And that's using the rudder trim switch. I highly recommend having that assigned. It's famously the most used switch on this aircraft. It's often known as. Through 1,000 feet above the ground now, so I'm going to lower the nose to 10 degrees. I'm going to leave the power levers where they are. I don't need to adjust those. What I'm going to do is, as we accelerate, I can engage the autopilot. It's going to go into basic modes, wing level, pitch hold. I'm going to engage nav mode, and I'm going to engage IAS mode, and I'm going to set that to 210 knots, because that's the speed I'm going to climb at. Now we're above our minimum clean speed, so flaps coming to 0. Again, this is not SOP, this is just what I can remember. You'll notice it's being quite aggressive at accelerating. And I'm going to put the bleeds on and min. And now I'm going to bring those power levers. You'll see that we're at NTOP, normal takeoff power. and 1020 RPM. All I have to do is bring those back to 900, and this will go to MCL, maximum climb thrust, which happens to also be 90, but at 900 RPM. So there we go. Now we are not going to level up for 4,000, and this is something I want to show you. We haven't pressed outsail. This is the most amazing part of the design of this autoflight system. If you don't press outsail, it won't level off. It will keep sailing through it. So let's go up to 6,000 feet, but what you've got to do is press outsail, and there it is armed. Otherwise it just doesn't work. It's amazing. If you press it again by accident, it turns off, and there's a million ways to disconnect it by accident. So we're climbing with the gear up, the flaps at 0, at climb thrusts with pressurization in nav mode. Looking good. There's that beep. That beep really takes me back. I spent a long time listening to that. It's very high pitched. It's quite actually, it's really quite sharp. It's not as soft as the one on the Airbus. But there we go, out star. So what you don't want to do now is fiddle with the vertical modes. Otherwise, you'll just bust your altitude very easily. Now, no auto thrust, so we have to control the power ourselves. These are called power levers, not thrust levers. But yeah, we bring them right back, and you can see our torque changing. You won't hear much of a change because, of course, the RPM is staying at 900, which is the loudest part of the airplane, is the vibration off those propellers. So it doesn't actually matter. But away we go. For this short sector, let's cruise at just simply flight level 100. Very easy to get to. So I'm going to press outsail as soon as I set the altitude. Then I'm going to press IS, and we'll go up again at 210 knots. So we'll put that in there. Quite common to climb in IS, not VNAV. Right, now I'm going to bring the power back up to our D10, the flight rating, which will therefore give us climb power as we've set the power levers, the condition levers to 100, therefore giving us climb. It's worth noting you can actually override this. This is sort of automatic, but if I press if I press max cruise now, I can command cruise power out of the engines. But I'm going to leave it at max climb, which is what I wanted. The eagle-eyed of you will notice that I missed the main thing you've got to do in a turboprop on takeoff, the auto feather. You have to have that for takeoff. This is where the engine, if it senses a failure, it will automatically feather the propeller on that engine to be like how we showed at the start, where it won't cause drag. It's a whole video on its own. But yeah, I totally forgot to do that. Again, I don't fly this airplane these days, but it was in the checklist, so we must have missed it somewhere. But yeah, auto feather just has to be on, so it would be turned off at this point. And also we can turn off the fuel pumps, and we lost the extra hydraulics. We don't need those. So now let's act as if this is our sort of cruise setting. We're very shortly going to descend, but we're just at flight level 100 for now. Let us set those condition levers to cruise. So bring it back to 850, and there you go. Max cruise power is automatically adjusted on the engines for us. Good. We're now going to head over and fly the ILS into Glasgow. So it's pretty much already time to descend. I'll put in 4,000 feet initially. I'll put in outsail, very importantly, and then vertical speed was a very common mode for descent. So you could put in a vertical speed and use that to head down. Again, VNAV not used very often. It could be used, but not very often. Then, now we're going down, we're going to go onto the QNH, so we'll set that. You can't actually get it to remember the old one, not that I remember anyway, so we need to go all the way back down to QNH of 981. This brings me to my next point, which is really impressive that they've modelled this. In this aircraft, there's a speed limit reduction at around flight level 80. Now, we're already on QNH, so it's going to happen slightly later, because it would normally be around 80, but it will happen based on standard. Quite confusing to understand, I know, but effectively you'll see this speed tape reducing now, and it's going to come down and sit at just above 240. It's actually a limit for the windscreens in case you hit birds, but it comes down quite aggressively, and it's easy to find yourself nearly overspeeding because of it, because on the Airbus it's a little more soft than that. But yeah, it just suddenly cuts off at about flight level 80, but remember that's based on standard, so because we're on a lower QNH it's going to happen a little bit later. Heading in for the ILS now, if we look at our nav source, if I put it to ILS, it does revert to wings level, but you can see ILS 229.110.1 is already set, and I can already set the FO side, I think, to that as well. You can see it's tuned down here, ILS 1 and ILS 2, which is great, and that's what we're going to use to fly. So for now, I'm going to put it into heading mode, and we'll go and intercept the ILS using that. In terms of the approach checklist, descent, sorry, we've done the altimeters, review, cabin altitude, and ice protection. So we've done altimeters, lights we've left on because of our short sector. GPWS landing flap, we're going to land flap 15 for this one, so we have to set it over here, set to 15. and there is a button for a steep approach, but that's not what we're concerned with for now. Fuel transfer off, but we're going to turn on those fuel pumps again, quite standard sort of airplane thing to do, and then we'll turn on the extra hydraulic backup systems just so they're ready just in case. We've got hydraulics, passenger signs are on, caution warning lights checked, cabin is secure. That is the approach checklist. Next one will be the landing checklist. Looking on the overhead panel. And there you go. I've been caught out by the classic, you've got to have the heading bug aligned, not something the Airbus has, so just doesn't feature in my mind. It's amazing the things that you lived with every day and got so used to, and now it's, yeah, I have to really think about them. So we'll go vertical speed 1000, add a bit of power, head out to that RNS. Some other little details as we look around the flight deck that it's all just coming back to me the more time I spend in here. But yeah, the landing gear, when we put it down, you actually have to press this little lock button. You can't just move it. You press the lock down and then do it. So you get used to doing that with just your one hand. It's a bit of a technique, but it's designed so you can't do it by accident, of course. You'll notice that now I've brought the power back and we're not at the takeoff thrust, that the trim is slightly out. So when you reduce the power, you actually need to do a bit of left rudder trim. So you're going to then use that rudder trimmer to center that little target underneath at the top of the artificial horizon. And that brings me to my only current criticism of this aircraft, and I'm not sure if it's anything to do with my settings, but I find that the PFD in the real aircraft is very big, very clear. It's actually quite a big screen. I find this one ever so slightly blurry, and therefore one of the most crucial bits to see is this little side slip indicator. And I find it's ever so slightly harder to read than I'd like, especially when you're sitting at the sort of default view distance. I just feel like it could be a tiny bit more crisp. Would be nice. That's something I'd like to see anyway. Just the text on the PFD. Again, it could be one of my settings, but the rest of the flight deck looks absolutely stunning. So I suppose it just stands out compared to the real crisp texturing you've got all over the place, which just looks absolutely lovely. It's just evident everywhere that they've thought about it, and we have the weathering where you'd expect it. You know, like I said, under these master caution buttons, this is where people sometimes rest their feet. Hence, you get that the wearing off down to the anti-rust layer and so on. So really nice, but yeah, if that PFD could just be a little bit crisper. There's just so many things to talk about on this airplane, I can't possibly fit them all into this video. But one thing to note is you need your HSI selector pointed to the side that's flying, so we're flying from the left-hand seat, so I want this HSI to be what the airplane follows in nav mode. There's the radio altimeter coming to life. You'll also notice at 11 miles on the glide slope, we're clean, and 200 knots, no problem. You know, it's surprising what you can get away with this airplane, and if you need to slow down, you can actually bring the propeller RPM up. It'll be like putting the brakes on. We need to set our approach speeds though, so we're doing a flat 15 landing, which we've told the GPWS, and then you just click here again, and there they are. So we've got 116 and 136, so 116 is going to be our VREF. I'm going to put up flat 5 now to start slowing us down, so flat 5 is selected. We've got the power back, and yeah, we're going to start configuring for our landing checklist to come. Now, landing this airplane is a very, very unique thing. It's unusual. You leave power on if you're landing flat 15. Even flat 35, which is, again, a whole other topic, you would leave the power on. But you would actually reduce it slightly to land if you're flat 35. But we're landing flat 15, so we're going to leave it pretty much where it is. We might even need to add power. The reason is the pitch limit is 5 degrees, which you'll see shortly we're going to be basically sitting at just by having a flat 15 landing. So you can easily be very close to 5 degrees. It's something you have to be very conscious of on the Dash 8. It does have the Q400 specifically. It does have the speed limits over here, so flat 10 degrees of flap is 181. So once we below that, which we are, I can get to flat 10. You'll notice no speed limits are shown. That's the gear horn, because we've gone to flat 10 without putting the gear down. But yeah, no speed limits are shown on the speed tape, so you do have to remember those speeds to know whether you've bussed them or not in case of turbulence or something like that. Let's put the gear down to get rid of that horn. And now the speed's going to come rushing back, so you've got to remember to get the power back on. But the big advantage of the Dash 8, and turboprops in particular, you get very instant power. So if you need to suddenly add power, I can just do it. If I put those up now, the engines will spool up. There is a slight lag, but it's quicker than it would be on an Airbus, I can tell you that. And you instantly feel the effect of it. Very nice. Right, let's get the last stages of flap out. So we're going to flat 15 for landing. get the speed back to 116, and we should put the condition levers to maximum. But I'm going to do something a bit clever, or not clever, just normal, but we can do reduced NP landing. So if you press that, it says reduced NP, and if you're quick enough, you bring these to max, and it will have them ready for a go around in the max position, but you'll actually land with them at 850. So if you've been a passenger on a Dash 8, you might notice that the prop RPM didn't go up before landing, and that's what they'd have done. It's quite normal, it's quieter, it's nicer. However, if you're in turbulent conditions, most pilots, and certainly I, prefer to have actual max RPM because you've got more instant power because the propeller blades are just spinning that bit faster, a bit like being in first gear. Right, I'm going to start setting my approach power now. Slightly faster, 1,000 feet, but there we go. I'm going to go with about 25. I'm going to have to relearn all my datums for what sort of power setting would work. Not sure what this message is, but we won't get distracted with that. So it's time to land. Landing checklist is landing gear down, 3 greens. We've got the flaps set to 15 and indicating over there on the FO's display. The propeller levers are at max, but we don't need the actual RPM to be 1020. Bleed air 1 and 2 min and flight attendant notification as required. So there we go. So we're going to do a bleeds on landing. I can't remember if there was a difference. Maybe some places you'd need to adjust it. So, as we said, 5-degree limit on the pitch. You can see that I'm slightly fast. If I bring the speed properly back, we'll get to that VAP of 116. So let's go all the way to idle, actually, and just see what happens. So you'll see how quickly the speed comes back. Now let's put it where it was. And look at that, 5 degrees of pitch. 25, there we go. So, that's the view you get. It is, yeah, quite interesting. So let's see what we can do. Autopilot is off. And we're just going to follow that, set the rudder trim as required. Just following the flight directors now, nothing too unusual. It's quite a slow approach, but it's not dissimilar with flat 15 to a normal jet aircraft. For example, the Airbus can easily be in the 120s when it's light. Slightly out of trim though, you do have to trim it. That's something else I'm not used to. And we're going to land by getting the nose up to 5 degrees, leaving the power where it is, possibly adding some if required, but only if required. We don't want to add power routinely just for the sake of it. So you can see I've got the speed up a bit there, which is cheating. Get the power back. It's going to take me a while to get used to this again in simulator land, no doubt.
50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
There's touchdown, bring them through to idle, and then set them to disk. Now, I don't know why the props are overspeeding there. They didn't do that in the real aircraft. They would quite happily just reduce back nicely. But there we go. I've not touched the brakes, and the airplane will roll out. You just don't really need them. I'm not sure whether you'd put it into disk until the nose gear touchdown in hindsight, but there we go. Things I need to try and get back to remembering. But that's us safely down in Glasgow, so welcome. I won't run through the after landing stuff. This has been a very long video, so thank you for sticking with it. And what we'll do is I will go and find a replay for you. So that's all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. As you can tell, I'm very impressed with this version of the Q400. It is really absolutely lovely to use, and it's so incredibly detailed. A fantastic visual model in X-Plane as well, one of the best I've seen in X-Plane. There'll be plenty more videos using this on the channel coming soon, as well as live streams, as well as our normal Airbus guides and live streams as well. So I look forward to seeing you again in one of those in the near future. Please do keep safe and well. Bye bye.